Officer Mark Peters had always prided himself on his ability to handle difficult situations. Whether it was a routine traffic stop or a high stakes emergency, he had always kept his cool. Yet, on this particularly quiet Wednesday afternoon, Mark had no idea that he was about to encounter someone who would turn his usual day of patrol into something he'd never forget. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. It had been a slow morning in the small town of Westfield, which was nestled in the rolling hills of upstate New York. Mark was used to the calm, peaceful vibe of the area. There wasn't much crime to speak of, and most of his days were filled with the usual rounds, patrolling the same few roads, talking to the locals, and responding to the occasional minor incident. His police cruiser hummed softly along the tree-lined streets, the sun breaking through the clouds and casting warm rays on the town. It was one of those idyllic, serene days that seemed almost too perfect. But that was about to change. As he drove past the old brick library on Maple Street, Mark spotted a car ahead of him moving slightly faster than the posted speed limit. It wasn't an outrageous violation, but it was enough to warrant a stop. Mark flicked on his lights and signaled for the car to pull over to the side of the road. It wasn't his first traffic stop, and he expected this one to go as smoothly as most of the others. He assumed it would be just another case of someone in a hurry to get somewhere. The car slowed and drifted to the shoulder of the road. Mark followed suit, pulling his cruiser behind it. He noted that it was a sleek black sports car, a Tesla to be precise. The car was new, sharp, and well-maintained, the type of vehicle you wouldn't expect to be speeding through a quiet town like Westfield. Mark could tell the driver was going to be someone who was used to the finer things in life. As he got out of the cruiser and made his way toward the vehicle, he noticed the tinted windows and the quiet hum of the car's engine, which added to its air of exclusivity. Mark tapped on the window and it slid down with a soft whoosh. As soon as he saw the driver, his eyes widened just a bit, though he managed to maintain his professional demeanor. The woman behind the wheel was undeniably familiar. Long blonde hair, a pair of stylish sunglasses, and a look of mild curiosity. It took Mark a split second longer than it should have to realize who she was, and when it hit him, his heart skipped a beat. It was none other than Taylor Swift. Now, Mark had seen his fair share of celebrities over the years. Westfield, being near a major highway, occasionally attracted tourists or those passing through. He'd even met a few minor actors and musicians at local events or seen them at the small shops around town. But Taylor Swift, she was a different story altogether. She was one of the most famous pop stars in the world. Someone who had sold out arenas, broken records, and had millions of fans across the globe. Mark had never imagined that he would have the opportunity to speak to someone like her, let alone stop her for a speeding violation. "Good afternoon, ma'am," Mark said, trying to keep his voice steady. He was certainly professional, but the inner fanboy in him was struggling to remain calm. "I pulled you over for speeding. You were doing about 15 miles over the limit back there." Taylor, with her trademark calm and poised demeanor, offered a small smile. She looked up at him over the rim of her sunglasses, and for a moment, there was a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "Oh, I'm so sorry, officer," she said with a gentle, almost apologetic tone. "I didn't realize I was speeding." Mark nodded, trying to keep his composure. "It happens," he said, still trying to act normal. "Do you have your license and registration?" Without missing a beat, Taylor reached into the glove compartment, retrieved her documents, and handed them over. Mark took the license, trying to suppress the rising wave of excitement that was bubbling inside him. It felt surreal to hold her ID in his hands. This was the real Taylor Swift, not the pop icon, but the person behind the fame. He glanced down at the name just to make sure he wasn't imagining things. Taylor Allison Swift. There it was, in black and white. "I apologize again," Taylor continued, her voice warm and friendly. "I'm just trying to get to a meeting. I've had a bit of a busy day." Mark gave her a reassuring smile. "No problem, ma'am. It's just a simple stop. I'll be right back with you in a moment." He turned to walk back to his cruiser, his mind racing. This wasn't just any routine stop. This was Taylor Swift. He could hardly believe it. She was famous for so many things. Her chart-topping hits, her high-profile relationships, and of course, her charitable efforts. But here she was, in Westfield, getting pulled over like anyone else. Mark shook his head, wondering if he was dreaming. His thoughts were interrupted when his radio crackled, bringing him back to reality. As he stood by his cruiser, running her information through the system, Mark tried to process everything. He couldn't believe he was in the middle of this situation. The idea of simply issuing a ticket felt odd. What did you do when you pulled over someone like Taylor Swift? He glanced back toward her car, catching a glimpse of her sitting calmly, her sunglasses still on, her hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. She looked completely unbothered, as though this sort of thing happened every day. "Mark, everything okay?" came a voice over the radio. It was Officer Laura Jenkins, his colleague who was usually stationed at the local coffee shop. "You're not calling in any backup, are you?" Mark paused for a moment, fighting the urge to laugh at the absurdity of it all. "No backup needed, Laura," he replied, keeping his voice even. "Just a routine stop." But it wasn't routine, was it? Not by a long shot. After a few minutes that felt like an eternity, Mark returned to Taylor's car with her information. He cleared his throat and bent slightly to speak through the window again. "Ma'am, everything checks out. You're free to go, but I'll need to issue a warning this time for speeding." Taylor gave him another smile, one that seemed to light up her entire face. "Thank you, Officer Peters. I really appreciate it." Mark's heart fluttered at hearing his name come from her lips. He nodded, trying to maintain his professionalism. "No problem, ma'am. Just be careful on the road." As he turned to walk back to his cruiser, Taylor called out to him, "Hey, Officer Peters?" He turned back, his hand already on the door handle. "Yes, ma'am?" "I'll try to keep it under the limit next time," she said with a grin that made Mark feel like he was talking to a friend rather than a global superstar. He laughed nervously, caught off guard by her charm. "That's all I ask. Stay safe out there." And just like that, the encounter was over. Taylor Swift drove off into the distance, her black Tesla gliding down the road with a quiet hum. Mark stood there for a moment, watching her go. He could hardly believe what had just happened. He had pulled over Taylor Swift, an experience most people could only dream of. As he climbed back into his cruiser and began to drive away, Mark couldn't help but shake his head in disbelief. It had been a strange, surreal moment, but one that he would cherish for a long time. After all, how many police officers could say they had an encounter like that? But the real kicker, the thought that kept running through his mind as he drove back through the quiet streets of Westfield, was this. What were the chances that in a town this small, on an ordinary afternoon, Taylor Swift would end up right in front of him, just like any other citizen? The rest of Mark's shift was uneventful, but the quietness didn't feel the same as it normally did. For the rest of the afternoon, his mind kept drifting back to that moment, the surreal encounter with Taylor Swift. He had known she was a superstar, but seeing her in person, in the unassuming town of Westfield, was something entirely different. She wasn't just a name in the tabloids or a face on a billboard. She was real human, and most surprisingly, she was just like anyone else. At least, that's how it felt in that moment. But for Mark, this was a reminder that celebrities had lives too. Lives that didn't always involve flashing lights, red carpets, or adoring crowds. It wasn't until the next day, when Mark sat down with his partner, Detective Sarah Lawrence, that he had the chance to talk about the encounter. Sarah had been with the department for over a decade, and she'd seen her fair share of celebrities passing through, though she never seemed to be quite as starstruck as the younger officers. Mark was determined to find someone who would understand just how out of the ordinary his experience had been. "Sarah, you won't believe what happened yesterday," Mark started, eager to recount the story. "Oh no, what happened? Did you get a flat tire or something?" she teased, her eyes never leaving the file in front of her. "Worse," Mark said, sitting down at the break table. "I pulled over Taylor Swift." Sarah blinked in surprise, clearly startled by the announcement. She looked up from her papers and gave him a raised eyebrow. "Wait, the Taylor Swift? The pop star?" Mark nodded enthusiastically, feeling his excitement bubbling up again. "Yes! She was speeding through town and I stopped her. I didn't even recognize her at first. Then it clicked. It was her and she was so calm about it." Sarah leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing as she processed the information. I can't say I've ever stopped anyone like that before." She paused, then grinned. "So what was she like? Was she cool about it or was she a diva?" Mark chuckled, remembering the encounter. No, she was really down to earth. No attitude at all. She apologized right away, and we even chatted for a minute. She seemed genuinely nice, like she wasn't bothered by the fact that she got pulled over. Now that's interesting, Sarah remarked thoughtfully. I would have expected her to make a fuss, or at least ask for special treatment. But no, sounds like she just acted like a regular person. That's the thing that struck me, Mark said, leaning forward a little. She was so normal. You hear about how celebrities live in this world of excess, surrounded by people catering to their every whim. But there she was. No entourage, no bodyguards, just her in a sleek car, trying to get somewhere. It felt real, you know? Sarah nodded slowly. I get what you mean. You kind of expect them to be a little untouchable. Like they're a whole different breed. But it sounds like she was just trying to go about her day like everyone else. Mark paused, considering Sarah's words. Exactly. It made me wonder how often she gets to experience a normal life, free from all the attention. It must be exhausting for someone like her, always in the spotlight. As the conversation continued, Mark couldn't help but think back to their brief exchange. There was something in Taylor's eyes when she spoke to him, a sense of calm that only someone with such a grounded personality could possess. It wasn't as though she was trying to appear humble or modest, it was just who she was. But even more than that, it was the way she had responded to being pulled over. While most celebrities might have tried to use their fame to get out of a traffic stop or avoided the situation entirely, Taylor had simply acknowledged it and handled it like a person who was used to dealing with consequences, no matter how minor. Later that night, as Mark sat at home, the evening news was playing in the background while he scrolled through his phone. He was catching up on some local news stories when a headline caught his eye. It was a report about Taylor Swift being in the area for a new project she was working on, a surprise appearance at a local venue that was being kept under wraps for the time being. Apparently, she had been filming a music video in a nearby town, and the local rumors had been swirling for days about her presence in the area. Suddenly, everything clicked for Mark. Her calm demeanor during the traffic stop made sense now. She wasn't in a rush because she had somewhere to be in a hurry. She was likely trying to avoid attention altogether. Westfield wasn't the type of town where a superstar like Taylor Swift would be easily recognized, so it seemed like the perfect place to lay low for a bit. She had probably been looking for some peace and quiet before diving back into the hectic pace of her career. Mark smiled to himself, wondering how many people had no idea they were walking around in the same small town as one of the world's most famous celebrities. But as the days passed, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. He found himself wondering what it was like for someone like Taylor to live a life so different from his own. He was just an ordinary cop, doing his job day in and day out. Sure, he had moments of excitement, like pulling over a celebrity, but the rest of his life was filled with the same routine, checking in with dispatch, patrolling the streets, and responding to calls. It was a simple existence, but he liked it that way. He could go to the local diner, sit at the counter, and talk to people without anyone asking for a photo or autograph. His life was his own, but for Taylor, it was clear that there was no such thing as privacy. There were fans everywhere, following her on social media, analyzing her every move, waiting for the next album or concert announcement. She lived in a fishbowl, where everything she did was scrutinized. There was no way to escape the spotlight, even if she wanted to. The thought lingered in Mark's mind as he went about his patrols in the coming weeks. He found himself looking out for her, wondering if she'd be passing through town again. But as the days turned into weeks, he heard no more reports of her being in the area. Maybe she had already moved on to another project, or maybe she had simply decided to retreat back into her world of fame and fortune. Either way, Mark couldn't help but feel grateful for that brief, unexpected moment of connection. It was a reminder that no matter how famous someone was, they were still just people. People with their own lives, struggles, and hopes. One afternoon, as Mark was sitting in his cruiser, he received an unexpected message from a friend who worked at the local news station. The message was simple, but it made Mark's heart skip a beat. "Hey, I heard something about Taylor Swift. You might want to check it out." Intrigued, Mark clicked on the link and was taken to a short news clip. It showed a video of a charity event that Taylor had attended the previous week, where she had donated a large sum of money to a local children's hospital. The footage captured her interacting with the staff, posing for photos with the kids, and speaking passionately about the importance of supporting causes that mattered. The video was heartwarming, and Mark couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in having met someone who used her fame for good. It wasn't just about the glitz and glamour for Taylor, it was about making a difference. That was something he respected deeply. As the days turned into months, Mark moved on with his life, returning to his usual patrols and taking on the responsibilities of his job. The encounter with Taylor Swift remained in the back of his mind, though, a reminder that sometimes life could surprise you in the most unexpected ways. He had always been a fan of her music, but now he respected her as a person more than ever. As time passed, Mark found himself reflecting on the brief but unforgettable encounter with Taylor Swift more frequently than he expected. The incident, which had started as a typical traffic stop, had evolved into something far deeper in his mind. Not only had he come face to face with one of the world's most famous pop stars, but it had also reminded him of the fundamental humanity behind celebrity culture, something often lost in the sensationalism that surrounded these larger-than-life figures. Westfield, the small town where Mark had spent his entire life, had never been a place to attract major attention. It was the kind of town where everyone knew each other, where people shopped at the local markets, and where gossip spread faster than a wildfire. The biggest headlines in Westfield usually involved local festivals, the annual county fair, or the occasional community fundraiser. There wasn't a whole lot of excitement, but having Taylor Swift roll through in a black Tesla, getting pulled over for speeding by a local cop, that was something that would be talked about for years to come. For a while, it seemed like the story was destined to remain a local curiosity, something that would be shared among friends over a beer at the local tavern, an anecdote to amuse new acquaintances. But Mark couldn't shake the feeling that the encounter was more than just an amusing blip in the mundane rhythm of his job. It felt like a moment of clarity in a world where everyone seemed so preoccupied with the distractions of fame and fortune. Mark began to keep an eye out for similar incidents, curious about how celebrities were treated when they left the confines of their manicured, high-profile lives. It wasn't that he was actively searching for them. It was just that he was keenly aware now of the difference between the reality of these famous figures and the media portrayals that often skewed their humanity. He wasn't a tabloid reporter, but he was starting to appreciate the nuances of celebrity culture. How so many people lived vicariously through the lives of the rich and famous. How we all got caught up in the spectacle. A few months after the encounter with Taylor, something unusual happened that cemented Mark's newfound perspective on the fleeting nature of fame. He was making his usual rounds when his phone buzzed with a notification. A news alert flashed on the screen and Mark hesitated for a moment before opening it. The headline immediately caught his attention. Taylor Swift announces charity concert in Westfield. A surprise for local fans. His heart raced slightly at the thought. Could it be that she was coming back to town? The article revealed that Taylor Swift was planning an intimate charity concert in Westfield, specifically organized to raise funds for the town's struggling arts programs. The event was going to be held at the Old Town Theater, a small venue that rarely hosted anything beyond community plays or high school musicals. According to the report, Taylor had taken an interest in supporting local communities during her travels, and Westfield had been one of the chosen towns for her next philanthropic project. The concert was meant to be a surprise for the residents of the town, and it was clear that only a select few would get the chance to attend. When Mark read the story, it felt like a strange sense of déjà vu. Just months earlier, he had pulled her over for speeding on a whim, and now she was returning in a completely different context. This time, it wasn't a police officer meeting a celebrity. It was the celebrity giving back to the very community she had inadvertently visited. The contrast struck him deeply. As the date of the concert approached, Mark found himself more and more curious about what it would be like. He had no illusions that he'd be able to see the concert up close. After all, tickets were extremely limited, and there were likely hundreds of locals who would be eager to attend. Still, Mark kept his eye on the developments, excited to see how the event would unfold. It was impossible to ignore the excitement buzzing through the town. People were thrilled at the prospect of having a world-renowned artist come to their quiet little corner of the world. As the day of the concert arrived, the streets of Westfield were bustling with anticipation. Mark had been on duty for most of the morning, patrolling the area and keeping an eye on the crowds that had started to gather outside the theater. It was strange, almost surreal to think that just a few months earlier, he had been in the midst of a routine traffic stop, completely unaware of how much his life, and the town's, was about to change. Now, the entire town seemed to be buzzing with energy, as if Taylor Swift had somehow sprinkled some magic dust over it. The concert was set to begin in the evening, but by midday, people were already lining up outside the venue. As the hours wore on, the anticipation grew. Mark was stationed nearby, making sure that the streets were safe and clear, and that the small town wasn't overwhelmed by the influx of visitors who had traveled from neighboring towns for a chance to see the show. It was a major event for Westfield, one that would be talked about for generations to come. As the evening descended and the concert approached, Mark received an unexpected radio call. It was from his supervisor, Lieutenant Jameson. "Peters, we've got a special assignment for you," Lieutenant Jameson said, his voice crackling over the radio. "We need you to provide extra security inside the venue for the concert. There's a high-profile guest expected, and we don't want any surprises." Mark's stomach fluttered. He hadn't expected to be involved in the concert security, but now that he was, he couldn't help but feel a sense of nervous excitement. "Roger that, Lieutenant. I'm on my way." When he arrived at the theater, he was surprised to find that the atmosphere inside was far more intimate than he'd imagined. The venue, although small, was cozy and packed with eager locals who had won the coveted tickets. Mark stood at the back watching the crowd, but his eyes were mostly trained on the front of the stage. There, under the soft, warm lights, stood Taylor Swift. She was casually dressed, her blonde hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders, and she was smiling, talking to a few people in the front row. It was the same Taylor Swift he had met that day on the road, gracious, calm, and grounded. But this time, she was more than just a celebrity. She was someone who was giving back, someone who was actively making a difference. She wasn't the Taylor Swift that the media painted in headlines or music videos. She was a person who cared enough to show up in a small town to lend her voice and her resources to a cause that mattered. It was humbling for Mark to see. Throughout the evening, Mark couldn't help but notice the way Taylor interacted with the crowd. She wasn't distant or standoffish, as some might expect from a person of her stature. She took the time to chat with the fans, to listen to their stories, and to make everyone feel like they were part of something special. It wasn't a performance for her. It was a moment of connection with people who admired her. It was clear that she didn't take the privilege of her fame lightly, and it made Mark think about how important it was to give back to the communities that supported you, to remember where you came from, and to invest in people who may never be able to repay you. That in itself was something rare. As the concert came to a close, Taylor made an emotional speech about the importance of the arts and how grateful she was for the opportunity to support the town. "I know this town means a lot to so many of you," she said, her voice clear and steady. "And it means a lot to me, too. This is my way of saying thank you for welcoming me into your community. Even if it was a little unexpectedly the last time I was here." The crowd erupted into applause, and Mark felt his heart swell with pride. This wasn't just a concert. It was a moment of true connection, where a famous figure used their influence for good. It wasn't about Taylor Swift's brand or her next album. It was about the people in the room, the children who would benefit from the arts programs that the concert had helped fund, and the message that celebrities could make a positive impact if they chose to. As Mark left the theater that night, he couldn't help but think back to their brief interaction months earlier. In a way, that traffic stop had been a glimpse into who Taylor Swift was as a person, someone who cared, who was humble, and who didn't let the trappings of fame define her. Seeing her in action, at the concert, only confirmed what he had suspected, that the real Taylor was someone who understood the importance of human connection. In the days and weeks that followed, life in Westfield slowly returned to normal. The buzz around the concert faded, but the memories of that night lingered. People would continue to talk about it for years to come, and it was clear that the town had been touched by something far greater than just the music. It had been touched by a person who believed in giving back, someone who understood the power of small acts of kindness in a world that often seemed too focused on fame and fortune. For Mark, the experience had been a reminder that there was more to life than what met the eye. Fame, success, and wealth were fleeting, but the impact you made on others, whether it was through your actions, your words, or simply your presence, was what truly lasted. And as he drove home that night, Mark couldn't help but smile, knowing that his small town had been part of something truly extraordinary. As Mark's shift came to an end, he felt a quiet satisfaction settle over him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. His mind still drifted back to the evening of the concert, to the genuine kindness Taylor Swift had shown the people of Westfield. He had always known that some celebrities had a softer side, but witnessing it firsthand was different. It wasn't just the generosity of a famous person, it was the real human connection that they created by using their platform for good. Back in his cruiser, Mark turned the key in the ignition and set off down the quiet streets of Westfield. The town had returned to its usual pace, but there was a sense of something having changed in the air. Even after the spectacle of the concert, the impact of the evening lingered. It was more than just a fleeting excitement. It was the reminder that sometimes small-town life could be the perfect backdrop for something extraordinary. As Mark drove through the neighborhoods, he noticed the small things. The streetlights casting a warm glow on the sidewalks, the occasional jogger out for an evening run, and the steady hum of life continuing in its own rhythm. The town was humble, grounded, but there was something undeniably special about it. The events of the last few months had reminded Mark of why he loved this place. The sense of community, the familiarity of the faces, and the way people looked out for each other. Taylor's charity concert had reminded him that people, even those who seemed untouchable, could still care deeply about causes that impacted everyday lives. It wasn't just the concert itself, but the ripple effect it had on the town. People spoke about the event with pride, not just because of the famous artist involved, but because of the purpose behind it. The funds raised for the local arts programs had already begun to make a tangible difference. And Mark could sense that people in town were more connected, more willing to work together for the betterment of their community. It had been an eventful few months, to say the least. And while Mark couldn't predict what the future held, he did know one thing for sure. He would continue to approach his job with the same sense of responsibility and professionalism that he always had, but now, with a little extra understanding of how the world operated beyond his small corner of it. Meeting someone like Taylor Swift had shown him that even the most seemingly unreachable figures had their own personal stories, struggles, and desires. It had humanized her in a way that few ever got the chance to see. As Mark pulled up to his home, he glanced out the window at the small town he had always known and loved. He smiled to himself, knowing that no matter how big the world became or how many famous faces he might cross paths with, the real beauty of life came from these quiet moments, the ones that reminded him of the importance of human connection, kindness, and community. For Mark, this was his world, and no matter how much it changed, he would always find peace in the simplicity of it. And as he turned off the engine and stepped out into the cool evening air, he realized that sometimes the most profound lessons in life came when you least expected them, and from the most unexpected sources. As Mark stepped inside his home, the familiar scent of coffee and the soft hum of his old refrigerator greeted him. He settled into his favorite armchair by the window, the night sky spreading out in front of him. The town was peaceful, the streets quiet under the soft glow of streetlights. It was in these moments of stillness that Mark truly appreciated the life he had carved out for himself. He didn't need fame or recognition. He had the respect of his community and the satisfaction of knowing that his work mattered. While his thoughts occasionally drifted back to Taylor Swift and the rare encounter they had shared, he realized that the most important part of it all was not the celebrity aspect, but the way it had made him reflect on the world around him. He had always been content with his life in Westfield, but now there was a renewed sense of purpose. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on a police officer pulling over Taylor Swift in a story? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.